Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into the haunting spatial transformation of Warsaw during World War II. We often think of history in terms of dates and battles, but today we're tracing how a vibrant, integrated city was physically transformed into a fractured prison, and then how it became a modern metropolis built literally on the rubble of its past. The physical environment of Warsaw was weaponized in ways that are frankly hard to wrap your head around. So let's walk through this very specific geography of destruction and ultimately memory.
The wall goes through the heart of the city and divides Jews from non-Jews as they were never divided before. This deeply personal quote from a survivor perfectly frames what we're looking at today. Because this wasn't just some political boundary. It was a violent physical severing. A wall didn't just quietly go up on the outskirts of town. It was carved right through the living, beating heart of the city, violently separating neighbors who had lived side by side for generations.
Part 1. A vibrant city before. Pre-war Warsaw. To really understand the devastation, we have to look at the jarring contrast between two completely different realities. On one hand, you have the warm, sensory memories of a Jewish survivor. Friendly neighbors, the smell of warm morning bagels being delivered, just traditional family life on bustling streets. And then, you have the cold, bureaucratic reality of the Nazi master plan, specifically architect Hubert Gross's fascist blueprint, where his literal assignment was to reduce Warsaw to next to nothing. Think about this number for a second. 1/3. Sure, there were distinctly Jewish neighborhoods in Warsaw, but because the Jewish population made up a full third of the entire city, they were highly integrated everywhere. Interaction with non-Jews wasn't rare. It was just a completely normal, daily event. And it's exactly this high level of integration that made the impending forced segregation so violently disruptive to the fabric of the entire capital.
Part 2. The Nazi Master Plan, Erasure of Warsaw.
The creation of the new German city, the Neue Warsaw, required the absolute erasure of the Polish metropolis as it existed. Hitler decreed that Warsaw had to be drastically reduced to the level of a provincial city. The plan was chillingly specific, envisioning a small city center inhabited only by Germans, heavily guarded by watchtowers, with zero Jewish population and a marginalized Polish population marked for slow extermination.
Part 3. Raising the ghetto walls, the physical divide.
This nightmare didn't just happen overnight, right? It was a rapid, highly calculated escalation. It started in April 1940 with just mere pieces of barbed wire popping up on the streets. But it swiftly evolved into a formalized prison. By late 1941, unlawfully leaving the designated housing district was actually punishable by death. It was a relentless march from segregation to absolute terror, which eventually backed people into a corner, leading to desperate armed resistance. To physically create this designated Jewish housing district, an enormous, chaotic demographic shift was shoved right through the middle of the city. We are talking about over 113,000 Poles being forced to leave the newly designated ghetto area, while a massive 138,000 Jews were forced to move in. They left their homes, they left their furniture and possessions, carrying only a few small bundles with them. We really have to anchor those massive numbers we just talked about in the deeply human tragedy playing out on the streets. Families were literally thrown out of their homes. They had to leave behind their furniture, their comfort, the lives they had built, carrying just a few small bundles into an area that was rapidly becoming severely overcrowded and filled with ruins. It was a completely orchestrated humanitarian catastrophe. Part 4. Trapped inside. Life and smuggling. Now, even within their prison, the population was further divided by German infrastructure. The ghetto wasn't just one big unified block. Serving the interests of the German military and economy, thoroughfares were carved off to keep traffic unobstructed. Because of this, the Jewish district was severed into a small ghetto and a large ghetto, sliced right down the middle by a highly guarded tram line. This brings us to a haunting survivor account that really captures the sheer terror of just navigating your own neighborhood. To move between the small and large ghettos, people had to wait for brief intervals when the German police would momentarily stop traffic and allow them to cross. The panic, the pushing, the desperate need to simply get away from the dangerous German presence just to cross a street. It really illustrates the crushing psychological and physical pressure they lived under every single second. And the desperation inside was absolute. Get this, a staggering 80% of all food in the ghetto came from illegal smuggling, not from the official suppliers authorized by the Germans. Let that sink in. 80%. If you relied solely on the official rations, starvation was a certainty. Survival literally meant breaking the rules every single day. Shifting from the macro scale of the city down to the incredibly dangerous street level, it's wild to see how this trade actually happened. Goods were thrown from moving trams that physically couldn't stop, just tossing items as they turned corners. But perhaps the most heartbreaking method involved children. Described as tiny dark creatures with legs like matchsticks, these kids would squeeze through ground-level sidewalk drains to drag bundles of food back in, their terrified eyes darting left and right. Without money or paid contacts on the outside, survival was virtually impossible.
Part 5. Annihilation and Uprising, the final phase.
The weight of this next statistic is utterly heartbreaking. 90%. The German occupation murdered 90% of the Jews in Warsaw. Survivors recall the grotesque reality of handcarts piled carelessly with the bodies of men, women, and children, filling enormous mass graves near the Jewish cemetery. A vibrant, thriving population was all but completely annihilated. Following the heroic Jewish uprisings from the subterranean bunkers in 1943, the Nazis shifted their focus. They went from murdering the people to systematically murdering the physical space itself. Heinrich Himmler explicitly ordered that the living space be completely demolished. He wanted it to disappear completely. The goal wasn't just military control, it was to destroy the very idea of the Polish capital. The SS took highly calculated, bureaucratic steps to ensure the ghetto was wiped off the face of the earth. First, they plundered anything of value. Second, they actually set up the Gorisha Street concentration camp purely to provide slave labor to detonate and dismantle the ruins. And finally, the surreal, twisted end goal, to cover the dead, flattened area with earth and turned it into a garden paradise for Germans.
Part 6. Echoes in the Rubble. Post-war rebuild.
After the war, Warsaw was essentially unlivable. But as they started to rebuild, architect Bohdan Locker designed a housing estate meant to be a living memorial. And here's the truly unbelievable part. The literal bricks of these new buildings were manufactured directly from the rubble of the destroyed ghetto, rubble that inextricably contained the ashes and human remains of the victims. So the new city was physically formed out of the victims themselves. This created an incredibly unique spatial legacy that you can still see today. Warsaw is naturally a very flat city. Yet if you walk through the area of the former ghetto now, you'll notice modern buildings rising up from these strange little hills. Well, those hills are actually the millions of tons of uncleared rubble. The very topography of the city was permanently altered by the destruction, meaning the modern foundations sit directly atop the destroyed world.
The memory of the ghetto is actively returning to the soul of Warsaw, hidden literally just inches beneath the modern streets. Today, pavement lines map out exactly where those terrifying walls once stood. Whenever city workers dig down to lay pipes, they instantly hit a second layer of ruins. And beautifully, every April 19th, growing crowds gather to remember the uprising. It's fascinating. As time goes on, the memory is actually strengthening, not fading.
So, we want to leave you with this final thought for our explainer today. As we navigate our own modern bustling cities, how much history are we standing on right now? What layers of triumph, tragedy, and memory exist just inches beneath our feet, waiting to be remembered? Thank you for exploring this spatial history with us, and keep looking beneath the surface.